Now we're going to make use of my kitchen working file and explore the variable options when it comes to actually printing your Gantt chart and associated tables. And when it comes to printing in Microsoft Project, everything is totally WYSIWYG, which is an abbreviation and stands for what you see is what you get. Effectively, whatever you see on the screen here, as so far as columns and date range of the Gantt chart, is what you'll get out on a piece of paper. So if I take my kitchen and just move this vertical bar, so all I can see, the task name, duration, start and finish, I can see part of the next column, but we'll see if that gets included or excluded. And I can see part of the Gantt chart, but not all of it. We go to print, which is file and print, as normal, Control P. And here's what we can see. So we can see the columns that are fully exposed. Also, the next column, which only has a part of it visible, is not shown here in the print. All of the Gantt chart is shown. I just need to navigate to other pages. So you can see there it is. And we go down and we can see the bottom of it. Come back left and we see the bottom of the tasks. So all the Gantt chart gets shown even though we can't see it on the screen. Where the WYSIWYG applies to the Gantt chart is the actual date zoom. So this zoom here is exactly the zoom we are using on the screen. I come back and change that zoom. So let's go a bit further in, shall we? So now we can see half of days here, well, quarter of days really, 0, 6, 12, 8, and then back to 0. Then go back to Control P for print. I get the same zoom option up here. So the control that you have is the zoom option here is what you see in the print. So I go the other way, so everything's a little bit closer together. And the columns that are visible are the ones that you see. So if I widen that slightly, I'll be able to see the predecessors as well. Back to print. And we can see I now see the predecessors column and the Gantt chart zoom is at the same location. Now, if I don't want to see any columns, we know we can drag the slider, but that only controls the columns at the end. What about I don't want to see the task mode or the information column? Well, we just simply hide them. So task mode, right click, hide column, information column, right click, hide column. Then when you go to print, you see those columns are then missing. So we can hide columns we don't want to see. We can use the vertical scroll bar here to decide which columns from the right we don't want to see effectively. And the zoom controls the physical zoom that we see of the actual Gantt chart itself. Now, if I change the table, which we've done previously, for example, from the view ribbon, I could change the table to the cost table. And then when I go to print preview, it's the cost table that I'm then shown in the print. And the same with the Gantt chart effect. If I change this Gantt chart to the tracking Gantt and then change the table back to the cost table, when I go to print, it's the tracking Gantt that is used over here and it's the cost table that is used on the left. So I'm completely in control of what I see, totally in that sort of WYSIWYG environment. What you see is what you get. Now, as well as the ability to control the columns that I see, the table that I'm using, and the Gantt chart, I have other controls as well. If I go back into the print dialog box, Control P, as well as being able to control the actual printer that I print to, I can change the date settings here. At the moment, it defaults to the start to the finish of the current project, but I could change that. And let's say, for example, I'm just looking to print a particular time scale. So from October the 4th through to October the 28th, that week, and you can see the preview has responded and it's only showing me that date range. Still for the tracking Gantt because that's what I'm looking at, still for the cost table because that's what I'm looking at, but now I'm in a much shorter date range. I can change the orientation from landscape to portrait. Usually, unless we start playing with the print settings, Gantt charts tend to fit better on a landscape layout. So you can see here I've gone for portrait and I can just see the table and I have to go to the subsequent pages to see the actual Gantt chart itself. And I can control the paper size, and then under page setup I have an infinite number of other controls here. The orientation, which I can do from the little drop box here. The zoom, it's 100%. So if I want to try and squash things on a little bit more, I could zoom in 75%. Okay, and we see things go a little smaller. Or I could tell it to squash 1 page wide by 1 page tall, or 2 pages wide by 1 page tall. Very similar to Excel, this little section here for controlling the zoom of your Gantt chart. I can control the margins. That will help me perhaps make things fit on a page or less. I also have a header and footer option, which we're going to explore separately. The legend is this little section here that tells me what all the bars mean. I could put that on every page, or I could have my own legend page or I could say none. If it's quite obvious what the bars all mean, which on a straightforward Gantt chart hopefully it would be, you may find that you'd want to say a little bit of paper and say none. And then when I say OK, the legend disappears. Obviously, then I need to know what the bars mean myself. Or I could just have a legend page. So when I say OK, it's still not on these pages, but then it has its own page. So I could stick that on the wall next to it, for example. That's quite useful having a legend page when you've got a lot of pieces of paper in use. Rather than having the legend on every page, print that off on its own page, and then each of the other pages will use less paper. So it's quite a green option. And then we have a view control. Now this is for controlling quite a few things, but one of the things it's quite good for controlling is the number of columns that you see. So you could say print all sheet columns. So that means regardless of whether you can see them or not. So it doesn't matter whether you move that vertical bar in the Gantt chart left or right. If I say print all sheet columns, I will get all sheet columns. Print the first, and then I can say how many columns on all pages. So for example, if I just say OK for a moment, on the subsequent pages which we haven't got because we're using a timescale, let's say print the entire project. And in the page setup, let's change the zoom back to 100% because it's trying to squash things onto one piece of paper at the moment. On the subsequent pages that I now have, I don't know really, unless I line all these pages up on the wall, what these tasks are. They're just little bars and I've got to sort of flick to the other sheet. If, however, under page setup and view, I say let's print the first two columns on all the pages. Then when I say OK, I get the first two columns, which happens to be the task number and the task name, on every page. So I don't have to keep looking back at the first page where I see them all and go across, and I can actually see the task name. So that's a lot easier then to line up. If this printout was, for example, sitting in a book or sitting in a PDF, which we're yet to cover, if they're on a wall and you line them up next to each other, you don't really need these additional columns, but it's all controllable on the page setup. So view. You can also ask it to print the blank pages or not. Sometimes if your Gantt chart is using a lot of pieces of paper, some of those pages will actually be blank because no Gantt chart actually travels into that section. If we don't print them, we don't waste them. But you might want to print the blank pages, so when you, again, stick them on the wall, they look like an entire chart and fit the timescale to the end of the page. So here, where my project ends, timescale still goes to the end of the page, just for neatness, more than anything, rather than stopping here at the project end. So you have a lot of controls. The view tab for controlling what you see, the legend for deciding whether you want one or not, the header and the footer, which we're going to cover separately, the ability to control the margins, and then the page, which is the orientation and any kind of zoom that you might want. So that's the ability to take your Gantt chart and effectively output it to a piece of paper or a number of pieces of paper for display, perhaps in a workroom or for placing in a project file that you then can flick through and have a look at the latest state of your Microsoft project.